Welcome to My Boulevard podcast, where we talk about everyday issues from a biblical and balanced perspective. I'm Dhati Lewis, and this season we're diving into fighting for the faith in today's culture, navigating deconstruction and reconstruction, and featuring the voices of poets, pastors, practitioners, and polymaths. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy today's episode. What's up, you guys? We are another episode of This Is My Boulevard podcast. We are excited to have a good friend of mine, Aby. Aby is a good friend, first and foremost. He is also here at Blueprint Church here in Atlanta, Georgia. And what's unique about Aby for me is that I've been able to walk with one another. We have been good friends and for over a decade now. Is it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's been a long time.
So it is just like being able to see your journey, to see your story, kind of walking through it. And that's really what we're going to, talk about today. I mean, the way it's kind of fleshed itself out now that you are currently the founder of A Billion Dreams Fund, and you're also the senior director at Perform, which you have both this kind of vocation job. One of your vocations is kind of leading and starting a ministry, but then on the other one is leading an organization, a for-profit organization. And so you have these worlds that you're navigating and kind of walking through your journey and your story of how you kind of came to this and how you're navigating now is what I want to talk about today. So share a little bit about yourself, share a little bit about the organizations that you're currently working on, and then we'll kind of talk about how we got there.
Yeah, sure. So first organization, A Billion Dreams Fund, is an organization that my wife and I started based on our time that we lived in India, and we'll share a little bit about that journey later. But it's an organization that works with validated businesses and organizations, social entities on the ground in India that help in women's rights and freedoms in terms of women coming out of trafficking and violence, and providing some kind of sustainable opportunities for them to get on their feet. We also work with children in education and health, and also with some organizations that are helping people that live in slum type communities and trying to help them through those type of situations and bringing them up, and especially related to the children of those groups. And we can talk a little bit about that later as well. So that's A Billion Dreams Fund. And so we've been working from here with the team on the ground there in India. And the other part is I'm working for a technology company, which has been what I've, my professional background, working and consulting IT services, and been doing that for almost 20 years now. And that's also starting from the ground up small company that we've been growing over time. So very entrepreneurial in spirit and also in action. So these are the two things that take up most of my time outside of family.
And if you're someone listening, people may think, oh yeah, so you're a person that was just kind of like, you had your profession, you had your day job, and then you kind of got bored, and all of a sudden, like, you started like, oh, what can I do? Let me start a nonprofit. But that's not your journey at all, right? You're, we talk about like urban missionaries here at the Boulevard family, and we tell you they're poets, they're pastors, they're practitioners, and they're polymaths. And one of the things that I love about your story is that you've always wrestled with this story between vocational and professional, and just kind of like full-time ministry, not full-time ministry. Like, you actually went to seminary or Bible college. At one point in time, you was thinking about being full-time ministry. But then, and I know over the last 10 years that you were just wrestling with this call, because you ended up getting, like you said, a job and kind of technologies. But then all of a sudden, like, there was this burning deep desire. And that's kind of when I met you, like this desire to do ministry, or specifically ministry in India. But you was just like, how is this going to work? Talk a little bit about that, like that journey, that passion, just the wrestle that you've had early in your kind of post-college Christian life.
Yeah. So, I mean, for myself, it started in my early 20s. So out of college, grew up in the church, and obviously, serving the poor and serving the less fortunate was always something that was taught in the church. In addition to being immigrants of Indian parents. We would go visit India quite often as a child, throughout my childhood, and seeing a lot of the poverty on the ground there as well during those visits. There was a connection to, as a Christian, as a child of God, that's been blessed with opportunities and resources. How do I help? But it wasn't really that real to me until my, I would say, early to mid 20s, when I was living in England and part of a church there. And the church went a bit deeper in terms of how they served their community, how they served the poor. I know growing up for me, we would, do our mission trips. We would help the homeless. We would do soup kitchens, and all those are great, amazing things that we do even today, and we should continue to do. The church there kind of taught me a bit about what more can we do? How do we make serving the poor part of our lifestyle? We all agree that, worship is a lifestyle. It's not just about singing songs. And so they would share about, how do we live a life of worship? And that was part of it. How do we serve? And they would go to people's older people's homes and help them with their gardens or their trash. They would go to the local HIV clinic and help there. They would help elderly people. That would help children with disabilities. They even volunteered at teen pregnancy crisis centers. There was so much they were doing outside of just the regular church.
Normal stuff.
Yeah.
And so part of me is like, what's interesting to me, even in your story, you recently graduated from college. What are you doing in India? What are you doing in England?
Yeah, that was part of the journey of where I thought I might be doing full-time ministry. I had left, I graduated from college, started working, and then decided to quit my job and join a church leadership training program in England. As part of the journey of me thinking, I would be doing ministry, but inside the church. Yeah. Later did I see God maybe calling me to outside the church, which we'll talk about, but that's why I was there. Right. Yeah. And so that was part of, my journey and what I learned when I was there.
So early on, you are graduating from college, you start a job, you quit the job, you go to the church, and then now you're in England, you're going through all of this, you're learning all these new things, you're being exposed to more. But did you jump into full-time ministry? You didn't go to the church. You went a different direction.
Yeah, I went back, came back home after that time, and started to do some ministry, working with these ministries, but at the same time going back into working, so that there was that challenge of, I do want to do more ministry, want to do more stuff on the ground, but at the same time, trying to pursue my career and just kind of be able to sustain myself that way too. So there was a tension, and that kept going for quite some time, even before we met, a decade ago. And so into my 20s and 30s, it was later into my 20s and 30s where what I had learned in England in terms of, this being a lifestyle, like this is not something that we do when we think about it or once in a while. It's like, how did this become part of my daily life, serving the poor? And for me, it was this connection to India and the work that I had learned about when visiting on my trips. And even I went solo on a mission trip. And I think that's where God really opened some doors and my eyes to what I could possibly do and how I can help.
And talk a little bit about how you navigated, because you've had this in your like a decade plus, right, of wanting to go to India or wanting to do ministry as a lifestyle, but also needing to pay the bills and working, and also feeling called to vocation, like to work, a regular or more of a traditional type job. Talk about the rest of that was going on inside of you before you started the nonprofit, before even going to India, like that decade plus of just that tension.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny when you talk about it. I did a lot of talking about India, about wanting to do this, wanting to do that, but it was a lot of talk. Yeah. I would do my job, like, let me donate some money to this cause, let me do a little bit of this, and let me talk, talking to people about what they do in India, some of the charity work, but it was still a lot of talking and not action. And it wasn't until one of my friends challenged me when someone that I didn't see very often, maybe once a year, and we hung out during holiday time, and he asked me, how are things going in life? And I said, everything's great, but I still want to do the stuff in India. And he said, well, that's great, Aby. I'm sure I'll see you in a year from now and we'll have the same conversation recycled over again. And he kind of called me out and really challenged me. And he said, do you really want to go? Do you really want to do this stuff? And he kind of caught me off guard. And I said, yeah, I do. Um, is it really going to happen? And so I think that put me on a journey to say, how am I really going to make this happen? Am I going to just go another decade of talking about it? And for me personally, it took almost like the example of me leaving my job, moving to England. It took me to kind of immerse myself in that environment. And so at that point, as I've been talking about it for decades now, and now I'm married, not single anymore, I'm married, we have two young kids. And, prayerfully with my wife, we talked about is this something that we can do? She's always also had a heart for doing mission work and medical missions. And so as we prayed through that, we made a decision with two young kids and strong professional careers at the time too, to say we're going to leave. She's going to leave her practice. I'm going to leave the company that I helped grow, as a tech startup, and we're going to sell our home and we're going to move to India, because if we don't do this now, it's never going to happen. Right. Yeah. And I was close to turning 40 at the time, and the kids will start getting older, and so I joke about it sometimes. As some people, they hit their midlife crisis. Some people buy sports cars when they turn 40. I moved my family to India.
Yes, yes, you did. And you moved there for 2 years.
For 2 years, yeah.
Right? And so, that's pretty drastic. That's a pretty extreme thing to do. To talk about kind of the process of doing that and what you learned in that time while you were in India.
Yeah. So the process to get there, me being a very project manager type mentality and very organized and, in a sense, very controlled, doesn't leave a lot of room for God to do his thing sometimes, right? So that was a personal struggle I had in terms of making a plan to get there, which we did in terms of, if we go in 2 years from now, let's work backwards. What do we need to get there? So it's like setting that end goal and then saying, okay, what do we do in terms of my work and her work? What do we do in terms of money, funding, savings? What do we do with the kids? And what will we actually do when we get there? So we did plan that out. We built a two-year roadmap before we actually got on a plane and moved. Yeah. So that's one part of it, whereas the control aspect of it. The other part that was out of my control, which God taught us, is once we got there, there was a lot of variables that we could not control in terms of what we would do, how we would do it, just the complexities of trying to do work in India, which is a whole nother conversation. But I think that was part of the journey in terms of us, getting to a point where we can actually leave. So, I think sometimes when people are struggling with the tension between the two, what do I do? How do I do it? Setting a goal. And for me personally, I started telling people we're leaving in 2 years, telling all our close friends and family, we're leaving in 2 years, and it almost made it more real. Like it couldn't back out. Yeah. Like it was a commitment that we made. And so that worked for me. It may not work for other people, but that was something that did help in terms of, we're going to do this. It took a 2-year journey to kind of get there.
And so now you're there, you're in India, the immersive nature, the variables, all the things, the struggles. How did being there for 2 years impact what you do today?
Yeah. So I think for me and for my wife, being on the ground in a place like India, even though we were Indian descent, we're very Western, obviously, in thinking and mindset and how things work, how the world works. And a place like India or other parts of the world, culture are very, very different. And for us being on the ground, and this could be the case for your own neighborhood or city. Like sometimes when you can say I lived here for all these years, but sometimes you have to really immerse yourself with the people, with the culture, the cultural, social norms of that area to really understand, how can I help these people, right? And how can I serve? So that was what we did in India, with religion, with social and economic class, with people who live in the rural areas and the villages versus people who live in the city. There are so many layers in India. And if we had just come straight from America and said, oh, I see your problem, this is how we're going to help fix it, we would have just turned things upside down. And I think what we were able to do on the ground is really understand some of the play, unlock and unpeel some of those layers that we had to do. I think in some instances, it took us a year and a half to fully understand how to to help certain people or certain situations or certain people group. But I think it was vital for us to be on the ground for at least 2 years there in our situation, to be able to now come back here, back in the West, and navigate the team that we've built on the ground, the problems that we hear about when we hear from our team. We understand it, we get it, and we understand where they're coming from. And sometimes those from a Western problem solving pattern won't work.
Yeah.
But us being on the ground for 2 years, like, we understand how some of those things may work and how do we help.
Imagine a movement where every urban neighborhood has trained, dedicated leaders sharing the gospel and making disciples. Here at Boulevard, we're building a family of urban missionaries made up of poets, pastors, practitioners, and polymaths who are transforming lives where they live, work, and worship. From launching new city hubs to strengthening existing churches and ministries, we're committed to making sound discipleship accessible in every urban context. This year, we're asking for your help to raise $50,000 in the last 50 days to fuel this mission. Your monthly commitment helps us to reach more cities, raise up more leaders, and bring gospel transformation to neighborhoods across America. Together, we can impact our cities one boulevard at a time.
How much of the vision for your nonprofit that you're currently leading, how much of that changed from going in to the 2 years of being there and what you're currently doing now?
Yeah, I think when we were there, we didn't have a timeline for how long we thought we'd be there. Family circumstances and things like that had brought us back. But while we were there, we had thought that we would just be, just engrossed in this day to day. We were on the ground doing all the work. But towards our time when we realized that we might be leaving, we had to figure out, how do we sustain this back in America? And so what type of team do we need to build, or what type of mechanisms and systems do we need to put in place for this to still have an impact and still continue the work and really expand it? Because now that we're coming back to the US, expanding the news, the awareness, the situations going on in India, that we can help educate people here back at home and how they can possibly help too. So that's been part of our mission, is not just doing stuff on the ground, but being a kind of a bridge between how people in America that may have similar burdens or passion to help, that we can bridge that gap with what we can do there together.
Okay. So explaining A Billion Dreams Fund is what?
So A Billion Dreams, we came up with the name because there's 1 billion people in India, more than 1 billion, might be 2 billion by the time this podcast is over. But there's, with so many people in India, so we wanted to provide this opportunity to say there's 1 billion people in India, there's 1 billion different dreams, and how can we help? The fund aspect of it is, just working as a foundation in a sense, where we can invest, bring in resources so then we can invest into people, into different groups, and not just where we're just giving money, right? Which is the traditional charity that we see, which is great. We wanted to do something a little bit more in the socio-economic platform, which is investing into some of their opportunities to build up certain skills, right? Whether it be to start their own micro business, right? And so, we've heard terms like micro loans or micro lending, and those are some social investing type of mechanisms that are used to help grow increase those living in, get people out of poverty all across the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia, wherever it may be. And so investing into those people, into different education, skills, training, health, to help them to sustain themselves. So that's what A Billion Dreams is. So we work with specific leaders on the ground and organizations on the ground, that they kind of run the organization, but we kind of fill the gaps in terms of what systems they need in place. How do we provide more resources? And they go through, and the great thing about it is, especially people here, our network here and community in the West, is they know that we have vetted these people and we know them. We have a relationship because of our time on the ground. Yeah. Right? It's not just some organization we vetted from thousands of miles away through some video calls and, applications and things like these are people that we did life with. And, we're supporting some of the social causes that they're helping. Yeah. The work on the team.
It gives credibility both ways.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
But perform pays the bills, right?
Yes.
So it pays the bill, and you're good at it. You're good at what you're doing. What has been the tension between trying to launch a nonprofit, right, and keeping a day job, and not just any day job? It's not like this is a career, right? That takes up your time. What has been some of that tension?
Yeah, it's before India, I would say it was this teetering back and forth of let me do a little bit here on the side of the nonprofit work, but I have my day job that I have to do every day, and that's going to take a majority of my time. And then there'll be in the evening or on a weekend, let me do a little bit of, the nonprofit work. So it was a lot of that. And I don't know how impactful for me personally, in terms of how much of a calling I felt I had in that arena, how much of an impact I was making, or I was satisfied with in terms of the impact I was making. And when we moved to India, I think that immersion for 2 years kind of also changed my perception in terms of work-life balance and how do we do things and what's really important for me, and my family, and what type of, impact I can make on this world that God's called me to do. So I think those 2 years really changed things. So there's still a tension. I always feel like I wish we could do more, right? On the India front. But I think this time it was building, try to build a team, try to have some other, automate some processes and some certain things that can help move things along. So I think we had that time also in India towards the end of our time before we got here to think about how do we do some of those things. Now, the internal tension is still always there. Yeah. I do enjoy that work. I love building out the teams, and the growth that we've had has been amazing. And it's been a lot of fun coaching people into their careers, helping them be better at what they're doing. That's been great. So I wouldn't say it's just to pay the bills. So there is a tension. I think a lot of people have that, it's not like they don't enjoy what they're doing outside of their ministry, right? But how do we still do both? Right. And so I think for me, it was spending those 2 years to kind of immerse ourselves in that situation, and coming out of that, it helped us kind of figure out, how do I balance the two? How do I still make an impact and feel satisfactory in terms of the type of impact that I'm making?
So the type of struggle that you have now is different than the struggle that you had years ago before you went and you immersed yourself in there, but the tension hasn't went away per se of like, okay, but you address it, or you work through it differently.
Yeah. I still have it. I'd say I feel better than I did pre-India about these kind of things, but definitely there is always a tension, which I don't know if it'll ever go away. I mean, but it's just finding ways to improve. How do I make it better? How do I make more of an impact? And, kind of setting certain goals each year and seeing those things through.
You've talked about a little bit about like establishing a team, and how important is that in team, especially when you're trying to work through, because a lot of our missionaries are like, they have multiple jobs, right? This is not their sole thing, is it's to do ministry, and there are many like you. And so as you're like, what are some things that you have done to kind of make sure that you're still making progress in it, but at the same time, maintaining that healthy tension, or work-life tension?
Yeah, I think one of the things, as if you're doing, the ministry and building teams, you have to be obviously an ambassador for the cause, what you're believing in. And I think for me, it was, I've always been doing my best to try and cast that vision and try to find like-minded people who also are aligned with that vision and want to help in that area. And so I think that's a big part of it. You're always kind of, sharing about this vision, and a lot of people around me would attest to that. Like, there's very few things I talk about more about than India and the work that we're doing there. And at the same time, I'm thinking about how do I, who also is interested in this? How can we work together? How can we build this together? It's not just about what I can do or me and my family can do or what Bill and Dreams can do. We're seeing how we can support other organizations that are doing work in India. It's a like-minded mission. And so how do we do things how do we partner together, or how do we just come support that organization? I'm willing, we're really willing to do that. It's not about our name or ego or anything like that. The end goal is how do we help these people on the ground? And so I think that's really important, is just getting your message out, getting your vision out to people that might be interested and like-minded.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that is because having like-minded people, and what we find when you have like-minded people, oftentimes people think that, oh, I don't need to find like-minded people because we're just doing the same thing. But actually, there's always a unique vantage point. It's sort of like looking at a diamond, and you look at this diamond, you hold it to light, and you just look at it from slightly different angles, which brings a whole new perspective. And we find that we're a lot more common, right, in our commonalities, but coming at it different, we actually are able to do more versus you going to recreate the wheel and everything when there's already people on the ground kind of doing that.
And especially in this scenario, when we're talking about people that are struggling with, it's really having capacity. Like, you're working your day job, but then you're still trying to do this. And, like, I want to do these 10 things, but I only have time to do one or two. So finding like-minded people to increase that capacity, increase that bandwidth, and seeing how can we do this together. Because at the end of the day, the goal is just to, like, how do we make that impact, social impact that we're trying to do with that, the group of people that we're called to, whether it be your next door neighbor or if it's on the other side of the world, right? And everything in between.
Taking a little turn on that, like how would you encourage leaders, pastors to support people like you in their churches that are sitting in their pews right now that are like, man, I have this burden. I've had this burden. Like, even whatever stage of life, you can just say, like, whether it was, when you just had this burden to do something but didn't know kind of how to express it, to even now. Like, how would you say, how can the church and church leaders better support individuals in their pews like you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think one of the things that is, I always like to encourage, obviously, is, I know we have the local church, but there's also, how do we reach the nations? How do we, it's all, we hear that in church a lot. And how do we reach people, unchurched people, and connecting with, a lot of churches do have different nationalities, different people groups. And how can we help other areas, other parts of the world and other countries? So it could also be local. It doesn't necessarily have to be, somewhere across. It may be a certain people group in your city that the church may not be aware of. So I think encouraging, in terms of in the message and in sermons and teaching in the church, in terms of opportunities and what opportunities are there for our people to serve outside the church. And, I'd mentioned earlier that, I learned that my calling wasn't necessarily inside the church. During my 20s and into my 30s was more outside the church. And so there are other people like me who are sitting in the pews as well, maybe not the pastors, but the people in the pews who also feel the same like I do. They're working, and they're probably going to have a conventional career till they retire, but they want to do more through the church or through some kind of ministry. And so sharing some of the opportunities out there, having people in the pew share some of those, doing different type of, events that really can help, share those ideas, I think are I hope I'm answering your question, but hopefully those are some ways that.
Yeah, I think that is. And what I hear you saying is creating awareness around what people like you are doing with other people. And then in there, you can even get create best practices and different things. But it's just basically fanning the flame, because oftentimes, someone like you who's a serial entrepreneur, someone who has ministry experience, and again, praise the Lord for them, but sometimes we just reduce, hey, can you be a host? Open the door for them, and we need hosts, and they're super important and all that. But I think sometimes we're just like, man, how can we maximize your potential, and what God has burdened and placed inside of you? How do we help fan that flame? How do we help bring that out, especially, and as I think about especially as you're wrestling with your call, what would you have liked someone, a pastor or a leader, to come, for someone to come alongside you to have said or done, during those times, especially in those 20s and, and early 30s when you were just struggling with this burden inside of you, but didn't know what to do?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what my friend, when he challenged me, unfortunately, I was probably in my late 30s at that point. But if, I had not opened up myself. I haven't really asked those kind of questions or been open to a pastor or someone in ministry or in any church elders. I've never asked that question in my 20s in church. Now that you mention it, if I had been more open, maybe I would have been challenged earlier,
Yeah.
right? With that. And so I think also there could be opportunities in the church to, again, to find ways to give opportunities to showcase, what callings do people have? What do they feel, they have a calling for, right? And having a platform or a space to share that and talk about that, because a lot of people may just feel like they may be like me, where they're talking a lot about it. They want to do it, but they're just kind of stuck.
Right.
Right.
They don't know how to do it. They
don't know how to
need a
do it.
blueprint.
Yeah. They need a blueprint. Exactly. So, the church, I think, would be a great place to give those people an opportunity to talk through it, to share about it. Yeah. And that might be different than your regular, small group setting or DNA setting. It might be a different type of setting where you are able to talk about those things. But I think if we did that, there could be a lot of opportunities that open up that people are, excited about. They never had a chance to talk.
Yeah, because I think people are often wrestling with their calls. Yeah. And they're wrestling with not just how they're called. It may be like, I got a burden and it's kind of fuzzy, but even more fuzzy when it comes to how to go about doing it or how to start that. And especially if you don't feel like called to full-time inside the church ministry, because I think that oftentimes is like, I got to be full-time in the church ministry, which means I got to know my word like nobody else knows their word. I need to do, and all these things, because, when people, and even this, like, you have chosen to be kind of make more social impact, right? And even what you're doing is not one of those ministries. And I've been there and know that you're teaching the word, you're doing Bible studies, but it's that and other things where sometimes when people are doing ministry, because they're not explicitly, just like, oh, I'm just going to teach you Genesis and Revelations. And, there's that tension. Am I really doing ministry? What does that mean? So to share a little bit about that, as you just think about the type of ministry that you decided to do. Do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think people should not feel that the only type of ministry or ministry is defined by, I need to, do the Bible study, or I need to, in the church somehow, be inside the church doing ministry. As I mentioned earlier, I mean, what really hit me when I was younger was just, all we can give to God is our worship. And there's so many forms of that worship. It's not just singing songs on, Sunday. So, whether they be people are artists, or whether they be, in, helping people, counseling, or through, through charity work, or even helping. I mean, we know different ministries in terms of health and fitness, right? And things like that. So there's so many different ways, and finding a way to be able to take what you're passionate about, what you feel God's burden on your heart. And, there is a biblical roadmap to, as that being a ministry. Right. Yeah. And so encouraging that with people.
And I just think that I've seen so many people pull off really excellent events and excellent, making social impact. And it feels like the guilt, you can also see the guilt. And so sometimes they baptize it with, hey, so like, let me just preach the gospel. And it's just like out of place, not really, it feels contrived. It doesn't feel, and again, I am all about hospitality and creating space. Oftentimes I talk about Henry Nouwen's definition of hospitality. He says that you do hospitality not in order to change people, but to create space where change can take place. And I think that's often, but sometimes we don't feel that sense of freedom, and we feel like, oh, it's not Christian unless every single time there's a clear gospel presentation or a clear prayer or a clear worship. And it's basically what the people are saying, unless you bring some form of what you did at church to your thing, it wasn't clearly Christian. And I think that is sad to me. It's sad to me. But I do think that there's ways to be explicitly Christian, right? And still make good work, right? Without having to, bring your church service or your church gathering to that
situation. And you're right. Like, I think just think about all the people that are not doing something because they feel held back by that, rule.
Yeah, paradigm.
Paradigm. And if they were to unlock themselves from that, all the opportunities, if they were to walk into that, whatever they're envisioning and serving, all the opportunities that may open up to create a space for God to come in. I think that's a great point.
All right, so I'm gonna want to end. I always end these times with you watch Family Feud.
Yes.
All right. So at Family Feud, at the end of Family Feud, there's always the last two people, the people who won, come up, and it's like the speed round, right?
Okay.
And so I've got 4 questions for you, but it's a speed round. So I want you to imagine it's like 50, 60 seconds put on the clock.
Okay.
And like you got 60 seconds to answer all 4 of these questions. Okay. And all 4 of the questions are going to be centered around this one theme. And the theme is when it comes to leaders within a church that's not called to do ministry within the church.
Okay.
And they're working out their calling.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Are you ready?
Yep.
Timer's on. What's working?
What's working? Being able to immerse yourself in this, in what you're called to do, and learn from the situation.
All right. What's broken?
The capacity, the tension and the capacity to be able to do, sit in both worlds in terms of the professional side and the ministry side, and just feeling paralyzed in that moment.
All right. What's missing?
More people speaking into your life, like being open and sharing your vision and your burdens, and having people speak into that and help you kind of move along.
All right. Last one. What's confusing?
If sometimes you wonder, should you be straddling both of these worlds, or should I just be going straight into one or the other? That's confusing. All right. Well, what is God asking sometimes? Yeah.
That's it. I love it. How hard? Was that good?
I struggled with the first one, but it got easier as I went.
It got easier as you went. You did a good job, bro. I appreciate it, Aby. Thank you. How can they find you? How can they find the Billion Dreams Foundation or Fund?
Yeah. So we have a website, abilliondreamsfund.org. We also have a Facebook and an Instagram, A Billion Dreams Fund. You can find us on there. We have stories of specific people, real stories of people that we've helped. And there's ways to help support us. We have links on our social media and on our website.
All right. We appreciate it. Go check them out and find the Billion Dreams Fund. And until next time, appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Dhati.